What would you do if one night, in the darkest corners of New Orleans, you stumbled upon a kidnapped child, weak, frightened, and fighting for her life? That's exactly what Aaliyah, a brave 12-year-old girl surviving on the streets, faced when she risked everything to save Maddie. But what happened next changed both their lives forever. This isn't just a story of rescue, it's a journey of hope, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that can form in the most unlikely places. Stay with us to discover how one act of kindness shattered barriers and rewrote destinies. If you love powerful, true-to-life stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of hope and inspiration. The sun was just a memory as twilight settled like a bruise across the sky, the last breath of orange light fading behind the rooftops of New Orleans. In the crumbling heart of the lower Ninth Ward, where shotgun houses leaned like drunks against cracked sidewalks and the air smelled of river mud and rain, a 12-year-old girl named Aaliyah pushed her bike through an alley of shadows. She was small for her age, skin the color of warm mahogany, her hair twisted in tight braids that framed a face far too serious for someone so young, her eyes wide and watchful, flicked across every broken window and flickering streetlight with the caution of a child who had learned long ago that safety was an illusion. The bike she pushed wasn't much, a rusty frame missing most of its paint, a chain that skipped when you pedaled too hard, one pedal bent inwards like a broken promise. But it was hers. Just like the battered canvas backpack slung over her shoulders, stuffed with empty soda cans and flattened beer bottles she'd scavenged that day. She paused at the edge of a vacant lot, the ground littered with crushed cigarette butts and the cracked shells of pistachios, and looked out at the river in the distance, a dark ribbon that caught the last glimmers of twilight like a secret. The Mississippi had always been there, older than the city, older than anything she could name, and on nights like this it seemed to whisper to her in a language only she could hear. Aaliyah's stomach rumbled, a dull ache she'd learned to ignore, and she adjusted the strap of her backpack, the weight of the cans clinking softly. She wasn't looking for food tonight, not really. What she needed was money, enough to buy cough syrup for the little boy who slept 2 crates down in the encampment under the overpass. He'd been hacking so hard at night that even the rats had stopped coming around, and Aaliyah had already given him half a loaf of bread she'd found behind the bakery on Claiborne Avenue 2 days ago. That was just how she was, how her mama had raised her, even if those days felt like they belonged to someone else's life. She wore her mother's memory like a badge, tied around her wrist in the form of a faded blue friendship bracelet. It was the only piece of her past she'd managed to hold onto after the fire that had eaten up everything she'd ever called home: walls, photographs, a bed she'd once shared with her baby brother. That was almost a year ago, though sometimes it felt like a lifetime had passed in those 12 months. In the stillness of the evening, Aaliyah pressed her palm to the bracelet, feeling the frayed threads against her skin like a promise she refused to break. The neighborhood around her was alive with a kind of restless energy that only came out at night. Neon signs buzzed above the corner store, where Mr. Dupree sold expired milk and instant noodles for triple the price. A group of older boys, hard-faced and hollow-eyed, lingered near a lamppost, trading curses and stories in low voices that rose and fell like the hum of cicadas in the summer heat. Aaliyah avoided their eyes, keeping her head down and her shoulders hunched. She knew how to be invisible when she needed to be. She turned down a narrower alley where the streetlights flickered in and out and the scent of old oil and stale beer filled her nose. Here, the buildings crowded close together, their bricks cracked and sagging, as if the weight of decades had become too much to bear. She liked this alley. It was quiet mostly, and she knew every crack and crevice like the lines of her own palm. Her hands, though still small and delicate, were calloused and chapped from days spent digging through trash cans and hauling bags of recyclables to the scrapyard. She didn't mind. She didn't let herself mind. The deeper she went, the more the city fell away, leaving her in a silence so complete it almost felt sacred. The only sounds were the soft crunch of gravel under her worn sneakers and the distant wail of a saxophone drifting from some unseen club. Music had a way of slipping through the cracks in this city, rising up from the river, echoing down the alleys, wrapping itself around you like a memory of something you'd never known but somehow understood. Aaliyah paused near a dumpster, setting her bike carefully against the wall. She reached inside, pulling out a crushed aluminum can with practiced hands. 5 cents, she thought, tucking it into her bag. 5 more cents closer to what she needed. She was about to move on when a sudden noise caught her ear. A shuffle of footsteps, low voices slipping through the cracks in the night like smoke. She froze, her breath caught in her throat, and crouched low behind the dumpster. 2 men stepped into the alley, their shapes tall and looming in the darkness. One wore a red varsity jacket, the sleeves frayed at the cuffs and the white letters on the back peeling like old paint. The other was shorter and thicker, a twitch in his left eye that made him look half crazed. They moved with a restless energy, shoulders hunched, eyes darting as if the shadows themselves were watching. "You had one job, man," the tall one growled, a cigarette hanging from his cracked lips. "One job, and you let her slip away." "I ain't the one who left the back door open," the shorter man snapped back, his voice rough like gravel. "Don't put that on me. She's worth more than either of us has ever seen, and if we don't find her—" Aaliyah's heart thudded so loud she was sure they'd hear it. She pressed her back against the cold metal of the dumpster, hands shaking. "Worth more than either of us has ever seen." The words clung to the air, thick and poisonous. She didn't know who they were talking about, not yet, but she knew enough to understand that whoever it was, she was in danger. The men moved deeper into the alley, their voices fading as they disappeared around a corner. Aaliyah didn't move for a long moment, her body locked in a tight coil of fear and something else, something that burned like a tiny flame in the pit of her stomach. She could leave. She could turn around, walk away, and pretend she'd never heard a thing. But she couldn't. Because even in a city that had taught her to look out for herself first, her mama's voice still lived in the back of her mind, whispering, "If you walk away from someone's tears, you'll hear them forever." Slowly she rose, her legs stiff from crouching. She glanced back at her bike, the chipped paint catching what little light there was, and took a deep breath. Then she stepped forward, deeper into the alley, past the point where she could still pretend she hadn't heard. She moved like a shadow, slipping between dumpsters and stacks of rotting pallets, her breath quick and shallow. The smell of rust and rain-soaked wood filled her nose. But she didn't let it slow her down. She had to know, had to see. It didn't take long to find her. Tucked behind a pile of rusted sheet metal and an old mattress that smelled of mildew and despair, there was a girl. She was small, maybe 6 or 7, with pale skin flushed red from fever, and tangled blonde hair that fell across her face in matted clumps. Her dress, once pink and frilly, was torn and streaked with dirt, a single shoe hanging from her foot like an afterthought. Aaliyah's breath caught in her chest. The girl's eyes fluttered open, dazed and glassy, and for a moment she just stared at Aaliyah as if she were a dream. "Are they gone?" the girl whispered, her voice as thin and fragile as the crackle of dry leaves. Aaliyah nodded, sinking to her knees beside her. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to explain why she was there, so she just reached out, her hand trembling as she brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. The heat that met her skin was like touching a coal. "You're burning up," Aaliyah murmured, more to herself than to the girl. She looked over her shoulder, scanning the alley for any sign of the men, but they were gone, for now. The girl whimpered, her body curling tighter against the mattress. "I don't feel good," she said weakly. Aaliyah swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I know," she said softly. "I know, but you're safe now. I'm going to take care of you." She didn't know how she was going to do that. She had nothing. No money, no home worth the name. Nothing but the stubborn refusal to let another child's life end in an alley like this. Gently, she lifted the girl into her arms. She was so light, her limbs limp and hot with fever. Aaliyah cradled her like she'd seen her mama cradle her baby brother once, long before the world had taught her that everything she loved could be taken away. She carried her to the bike, the frame groaning under the added weight, and settled the girl as best she could on the back, wrapping her own tattered jacket around her for what little warmth it offered. "Hold on," she whispered, gripping the handlebars so tight her knuckles went white. "We're going somewhere safe, I promise." And with that, she began to pedal, her legs straining as she pushed the bike forward, away from the alley, away from the shadows that had swallowed so much already. The night closed in around them, the city's neon glow flickering like a heartbeat in the distance, and Aaliyah rode into it without looking back. A girl with nothing but a broken bike, a scrap of hope, and a promise she refused to break. Aaliyah's legs pumped the pedals with a determination that came from somewhere deep inside, deeper than the ache in her muscles, or the chill of the night air that seeped through the threadbare fabric of her hoodie. She focused on the rhythmic clink of the bike chain, the crunch of gravel under the tires. anything to keep her mind from the 100 ways this could all go wrong. Maddie, Aaliyah had heard her name whispered in a fevered breath, lay slumped against her back, wrapped in the jacket that had once been her only shield against the cold. The little girl's head rested against Aaliyah's shoulder, each breath shallow and rattling in her small chest. The streets of New Orleans stretched out ahead, a labyrinth of cracked pavement and flickering streetlights. Aaliyah avoided the main roads, weaving through alleys and side streets that smelled of fried food and stale beer. The night was alive around her, the distant wail of a saxophone, laughter spilling from neon-lit bars on Frenchman Street, the occasional growl of an engine as a car rumbled past. She kept to the shadows, her heart hammering every time headlights swept across her path. In the basket of her bike, Maddie shivered, a low moan slipping from her cracked lips. "Shh," Aaliyah murmured, glancing over her shoulder. "I got you. Just hang on a little longer." She didn't know how far she could go, but she knew she couldn't stop. Not here. Not where eyes might linger too long on a girl like her, on a girl like Maddie. She took the long way around the old textile warehouse, the windows boarded up and tagged with graffiti that glowed under the sickly yellow streetlights. This was her world, a place of rust and ruin and resilience. It was a world that had taught her to keep her head down, her mouth shut, and her heart locked away. But tonight, she couldn't afford to be invisible. She had to be more than that. Under the overpass near St. Claude, she slowed, her legs screaming in protest. She could see her shelter up ahead, a tarp tied to 2 concrete columns, a floor of flattened cardboard boxes, and a crate she used as a table. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and tonight it would be enough. She lifted Maddie from the basket with care, feeling how the girl's body burned with fever. Maddie stirred, blinking up at her with glazed eyes. "Where are we?" she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Somewhere safe," Aaliyah said. Though she wasn't sure if it was true, she laid Maddie down on the blanket she'd kept as clean as she could, tucking it around her small frame. "You're okay now, I promise." The girl whimpered, turning her face into the rough wool of the blanket. Aaliyah brushed the hair from her forehead, her fingers trembling. She had never been good with words, but she remembered how her mama's hands had felt, soft and sure and full of love. She tried to make her own hands feel the same. For a moment, she let herself just breathe, the weight of the night pressing down on her thin shoulders. She looked around the tiny space she called home, an old milk crate with her meager savings tucked inside, a chipped cup she used for water, the scraps of fabric she used to patch her clothes. It was nothing. It was everything. She couldn't stay here long. She needed medicine. She needed to make Maddie better, and she needed to do it fast. She dug into the crate, pulling out the dented tin can where she kept her money, coins she'd collected one at a time, pennies and nickels, and the occasional dime. She counted them out, her fingers moving quickly, her breath catching when she realized it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Aaliyah closed her eyes, pressing her forehead to the crate. For a moment, she let herself feel the fear, the helplessness that had become too familiar. Then she looked down at the bracelet around her wrist, the one her mama had made for her on a bright spring day before everything had gone up in smoke. The blue threads were frayed and faded, but they were strong, just like she was. She slipped it off, her hands shaking. It felt like tearing out a piece of her heart, but she didn't hesitate. She tucked the bracelet into her pocket, gathered up the coins, and turned back to Maddie. "I'll be right back," she whispered, smoothing the blanket one last time. "Stay with me, okay?" Maddie didn't answer. Her eyes were closed, her breaths ragged. Aaliyah stepped out into the night, the city pressing in around her. She gripped the coins so tightly they bit into her palm, the sharp edges a reminder that she couldn't afford to fail. Not tonight. Not for this girl who had no one else. She pedaled hard, the bike rattling over potholes and broken glass. She passed shuttered shops and boarded-up windows, the ghosts of a city that had been built on dreams and left to rot when the dreams dried up. She thought of her mama's voice, soft and strong, telling her that kindness was the one thing no one could take from you. She thought of Maddie's fevered skin, the way the girl had clung to her without even knowing her name. At the 24-hour pharmacy near Elysian Fields, she skidded to a stop, her heart in her throat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she pushed open the door, the bell above it chiming like a memory. The man behind the counter looked up, his eyes narrowing as he took in her dirt-streaked face and the ragged hem of her jeans. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She stepped up to the counter, laying the coins out one by one. "I need this," she said, her voice low but steady, pointing to the bottle of children's fever medicine behind the glass. "Please." The man frowned, counted the coins, and shook his head. "You're short." Aaliyah's breath caught. She reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the bracelet. She held it out, the blue threads glinting dully under the harsh light. "Take this," she said, her voice breaking. "Please." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then, slowly, he reached for the bracelet, his fingers brushing hers as he took it. He slid the medicine across the counter without another word. Aaliyah clutched it to her chest, the weight of the bottle heavier than anything she'd ever carried. She mumbled a thank you she wasn't sure he heard, and turned back to the bike, her legs trembling as she mounted it once more. The ride back was a blur, a rush of wind and fear and determination. She felt every bump, every crack in the road. But she didn't slow down. She couldn't. When she reached her shelter, Maddie was still there, her face flushed, her breaths coming in short gasps. Aaliyah dropped to her knees, uncapping the medicine with shaking fingers. "Hey," she murmured, lifting Maddie's head. "I got it. I got you." She measured out a spoonful, coaxing it past Maddie's cracked lips. The girl swallowed weakly, a tear slipping down her cheek. Aaliyah brushed it away with a thumb, her own eyes burning. She stayed with her as the night deepened, the world beyond their small corner of the city fading into nothing. She whispered stories she barely remembered, songs her mama used to hum, anything to keep the darkness at bay. And when the first light of dawn crept across the sky, Aaliyah looked at Maddie and knew she would do whatever it took to keep her safe, because in a world that had tried to take everything from her, she still had this, still had the choice to be more than what the world said she was. She was Aaliyah, and she would not let another child be forgotten. The night grew thick and heavy, pressing in around Aaliyah like a cloak of shadows that swallowed every sound but the slow, labored breathing of the little girl lying on the blanket. Aaliyah knelt beside Maddie, her own breath coming in short, sharp gasps as she watched the girl's chest rise and fall. Each breath felt like a victory and a warning all at once. She touched Maddie's forehead again, the heat radiating from her skin like the embers of a dying fire. "Hang on, Maddie," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the girl could hear her. "You're not alone anymore." In the flickering light of the distant street lamp, Aaliyah's eyes traced the pale curve of Maddie's cheek, the small hands curled into fists at her sides. She remembered the way her own baby brother had looked when he was sick, the way her mother had sat by his side night after night, singing soft songs and telling stories until the fever broke or took him away. That was a lifetime ago, but the memory of it was still warm in her bones. She glanced around her makeshift shelter, the tarp tied down against the columns, the flattened cardboard boxes that softened the cold concrete. It wasn't much, but tonight it was enough. It had to be. She shifted, the cold seeping through her thin jeans, but she didn't dare move away. She had promised Maddie safety, and promises were the one currency she had never been willing to spend lightly. Outside, the city murmured and growled, a distant siren wailing past on Claiborne Avenue, the low thump of bass from a passing car, the soft hiss of wind rattling through the iron bones of the overpass. In this forgotten pocket of New Orleans, the world felt at once impossibly vast and heartbreakingly small. Aaliyah reached for the battered tin cup beside her, scooping up water from the plastic jug she'd filled days ago at a park faucet. She held it to Maddie's lips, coaxing her to drink, watching as the girl's eyelids fluttered, a soft whimper escaping her throat. "Just a little," Aaliyah urged, her voice gentle, patient. "You have to stay strong for me, okay?" Maddie managed a few sips, her head lolling back against the bundle of rags that served as a pillow. Aaliyah set the cup down, her hands shaking with exhaustion and fear. She pressed her palms to the concrete, grounding herself in the cold bite of it. She couldn't let her mind wander to the what-ifs and maybes. She couldn't let the weight of the night crush the fragile thread of hope she was clinging to. Instead, she focused on the girl before her, on the simple, stubborn fact that Maddie was still breathing. That had to be enough for now. She reached out, brushing a curl of dirty blonde hair from Maddie's forehead. The girl shifted slightly, murmuring something too soft to hear. Aaliyah leaned in, catching only the shape of a word, home. Aaliyah's chest tightened. Home. What did that word even mean to a girl like her? A place with warm light in the windows and a door that stayed locked against the cold? A place where someone was waiting, where someone would fight to bring her back? She swallowed hard, pushing the ache down deep. She couldn't let herself think of what she'd lost. Not tonight. Instead, she let her mind build a different kind of home, a safe harbor made of quiet words and gentle hands, a promise that this girl would not be left to the mercy of the night. Aaliyah shifted her weight, pulling her knees up to her chest and wrapping her arms around them. She kept her eyes on Maddie, watching each shallow breath like a prayer. Time stretched and twisted around her, the hours crawling by in a haze of exhaustion and fear. She didn't let herself close her eyes. She didn't let herself rest. She had learned a long time ago that the night was when the monsters came, monsters with human faces and hungry eyes. And tonight, she was the only shield Maddie had. At some point, the cold began to seep deeper into her bones, her muscles aching with the strain of holding herself so still. She shifted, careful not to wake the girl, and reached for the blanket that had been hers alone until tonight. She tucked it tighter around Maddie, her fingers lingering on the girl's shoulder, as if the touch itself could keep the fever at bay. "You're safe now," she murmured again, her voice fierce and soft all at once. "I won't let anything happen to you." The words tasted like iron in her mouth, a promise forged in the fires of everything she'd lost. Outside, the sky was beginning to shift, the deep indigo of night giving way to the bruised purple of pre-dawn. The first tentative light of morning crept across the cracked pavement, glinting off broken glass and the rusted frame of Aaliyah's bike. She turned her head, watching the slow bloom of light, and felt something loosen in her chest. The night was ending. They had survived it. She looked back at Maddie, the girl's face pale but peaceful in sleep. Aaliyah let out a slow breath, her shoulders sagging with relief. She leaned her head back against the cold concrete, her eyelids heavy. For just a moment, she let herself rest, her hand still resting protectively on Maddie's blanket. And in that fragile dawn light, with the city stirring to life around them, Aaliyah let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. A chance to rewrite the story that had been written for her in the ashes of everything she'd lost. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, and let the warmth of that thought settle into her bones. Because even in the shadows, even in the forgotten corners of this city, she had found something worth fighting for, and she would not let it slip away. Aaliyah woke to the soft light of morning, filtering through the gaps in the tarp overhead, the sky outside a pale wash of peach and silver. She blinked the grit of exhaustion from her eyes, every muscle in her body aching from the long night spent in vigil. Beside her, Maddie stirred, a low whimper rising from her lips as she blinked at the new day. "Hey," Aaliyah murmured, her voice soft and cracked with fatigue. "You're okay. You're safe." She shifted closer, reaching out to brush a lock of hair from Maddie's forehead. The girl's fever had broken sometime in the night, leaving her skin clammy and pale, but her breathing was easier now, less ragged. Maddie's blue eyes, so bright even in the half-light of dawn, fluttered open and fixed on Aaliyah's face. "It wasn't a dream," she said, her voice a whisper of wonder. Aaliyah felt a small, tired smile tug at her lips. "Nope," she said, "not a dream." Maddie looked around the tiny shelter, taking in the flattened cardboard, the tattered blanket, the battered bike propped against the concrete column. Where are we?" she asked, her voice trembling. "My home," Aaliyah said simply. She didn't add that it wasn't much of one, that it was little more than a patch of dry concrete and a tarp to keep the rain out. To Maddie, who had known warmth and safety, it must have looked like a ruin. But to Aaliyah, it was a fortress, a place that was hers alone in a world that had given her nothing. Maddie didn't say anything for a moment, her eyes wide and solemn. Then she reached out, her small hand finding Aaliyah's in the pale light. "Thank you," she said. The words were so soft, so earnest, that they wrapped around Aaliyah's heart like a bandage. She swallowed hard, blinking back the sudden sting in her eyes. "You're welcome," she said, her voice hoarse. They sat there in silence for a while, the city coming to life around them in fits and starts, the distant clang of a streetcar bell, the soft murmur of voices drifting from the street above, the smell of coffee and beignets carried on the breeze. Aaliyah felt it all like a promise, the world turning, the sun rising, and somewhere out there, a place where they both belonged. Maddie shifted, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I need to go home, she said, her voice small but steady. Aaliyah nodded, though the thought of letting Maddie out of her sight twisted something deep inside her. Do you remember where home is? She asked gently. Maddie's brow furrowed in concentration. I remember numbers, she said. A big white house, trees, a gate. Aaliyah's mind raced, fitting the pieces together like a puzzle. She knew the kind of houses Maddie was talking about, the ones that sat behind high fences and iron gates, places that belonged to people whose lives were as far from hers as the stars in the sky. She had seen them once, on a bike ride that had taken her too far uptown, past manicured lawns and windows that glowed warm in the night. She had never imagined setting foot inside one. I'll get you there, she said quietly, her voice firm. But we have to be careful, real careful. Maddie nodded, her fingers curling tighter around the blanket. She looked so small, so fragile, and Aaliyah felt a fierce surge of protectiveness rise in her chest. No matter what it took, she would see this girl home. She rose slowly, her legs stiff and unsteady. She crossed to the crate that served as her makeshift pantry, pulling out a half-eaten granola bar she'd been saving. She broke it in half, offering the larger piece to Maddie. Eat, she said. You need your strength. Maddie took it with a small, grateful smile, nibbling at the edge with delicate bites. Aaliyah watched her, her mind already spinning with the dangers that lay ahead. The men who had been looking for Maddie might still be out there, and the city was full of eyes that didn't always see a girl like Aaliyah as anything but trouble. She thought of the way the pharmacy clerk had looked at her the night before, how his eyes had flickered from her dark skin to her ragged clothes before he'd finally taken her offering. She had seen that look all her life, had felt the weight of it pressing her down, but she wouldn't let it stop her, not now. She glanced at Maddie, who was watching her with wide, trusting eyes. Aaliyah felt the weight of that trust settle around her shoulders like a cloak. She had never asked for it, but now that she had it, she knew she couldn't let it down. She moved to the bike, checking the tires, tightening the bungee cord that held the basket in place. It was a wreck, rusted, bent, one pedal that wobbled with every turn, but it had carried her this far, and she would make it carry them a little farther still. Maddie watched her with quiet curiosity, the granola bar forgotten in her hands. Will they come back? She asked softly. Aaliyah paused, her hands tightening on the handlebars. They might, she said honestly, but we're going to stay ahead of them. We're going to be smart. Maddie nodded, her small chin lifting in a gesture that made Aaliyah's chest ache with pride. Okay, she said. Aaliyah offered her a tired smile. Okay, she echoed. She held out a tattered sweatshirt, hers, oversized and patched at the elbows. Put this on, she said. You'll blend in better. Maddie hesitated, her fingers brushing the fabric as if it might bite. Then she pulled it over her head, the sleeves falling past her hands. She looked up at Aaliyah, the hood shadowing her pale face, and for the first time since they'd met, she looked almost like any other kid in this neighborhood. Almost. Ready? Aaliyah asked, her voice low. Maddie took a breath, then nodded. Aaliyah helped her onto the bike, Maddie's small hands gripping the frayed edges of the seat. She felt the girl's trust settle into her bones, heavy and precious. She took one last look at the place she called home, the tarp, the crate, the scraps of a life she had built from nothing, and then she turned the bike toward the mouth of the alley, the city opening up before them like a story waiting to be written. Hold on, she said. I've got you. And with that, they rode out into the dawn together, a girl with nothing but her courage and a promise she had made, a girl who had lost everything but found, in the quiet bond of two souls in the shadows, the strength to keep moving forward. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the streets of New Orleans like fingers trying to pry open the darkness, and with them came the city's awakening, the clatter of shutters lifting, the distant call of street vendors, the low rumble of engines stirring to life. Aaliyah pedaled cautiously now, the weight of Maddie behind her both a comfort and a burden. Her muscles burned, but her focus sharpened. The city was no longer asleep, and every step forward carried with it the risk of discovery. The alleys and side streets gave way slowly to broader avenues, lined with wrought iron balconies and creeping ivy, signs of a neighborhood slowly shedding the scars of neglect. But even here, Aaliyah felt the invisible barriers closing in. The wary glances from passing drivers, the quick steps of pedestrians eager to put distance between themselves and two ragged figures moving too slowly and too quietly. Maddie huddled closer under the oversized sweatshirt, her fingers clutching the fabric as if it were armor. Almost there? Maddie's voice was small but steady, a tether pulling Aaliyah forward. Almost, Aaliyah replied, though she wasn't sure what there meant anymore. The numbers Maddie had whispered, the address, had become a puzzle to solve in real time, a map of hope and fear intertwined. They passed a cluster of houses with freshly painted doors and manicured lawns that seemed to mock the cracked sidewalks and peeling paint of the streets they had left behind. Aaliyah's heart ached with the divide, how close and yet how impossibly far this world was from her own. Her mind raced through the plan they had made the night before, the detours, the hiding spots, the times to stay out of sight. She had become a master of shadows, moving like a ghost through the city's veins, but she knew the daylight was a different beast altogether. At one point, a pair of children playing in a front yard stopped and stared. Their laughter died as their eyes fixed on Maddie's oversized hoodie and Aaliyah's dirt-streaked face. Aaliyah felt the weight of their judgment, sharp and sudden like a slap. She pushed the bike faster, willing the moment to pass. When they reached a small park, Aaliyah stopped behind a cluster of bushes to catch their breath. Maddie took slow sips from a bottle of water Aaliyah had scavenged, the tremble in her hands fading with each gulp. Aaliyah pulled out the crumpled map she'd torn from a discarded phone book, smoothing it out on her knees. The faded lines traced their path like lifelines, and her finger hovered over the final destination, Garden District, the place Maddie called home. "You know the way?" Aaliyah asked, her voice soft. Maddie nodded. "I remember. The white gate, big trees." She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "It's not far now." But Aaliyah could see the uncertainty behind the words, the fear that had clung to Maddie's every step since the nightmare began. She reached out, squeezing the girl's hand. "We're gonna get you home. I promise." They set off again, the streets growing quieter as they approached the wealthy neighborhood. The contrast was stark, the smooth sidewalks, the ornate iron fences, the gleaming cars parked like trophies. Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat as they rounded a bend and the grand white gate came into view, framed by ancient oaks that whispered stories in the morning breeze. Aaliyah slowed, the bike rattling as she negotiated the cobblestones leading up to the driveway. Her heart thundered in her chest, not from exertion, but from the weight of everything she was about to face. From the porch, a tall man with graying temples stood rigid, eyes locked on the approaching figures. Beside him, a woman clutched a phone, her hands trembling. Aaliyah felt every eye in the yard turn toward her, curious, suspicious, wary. The silent judgment was suffocating, a wall she could not see but felt pressing in from every direction. Maddie stirred behind her, the girl's small voice breaking through the tension. "That's my daddy," she said, swinging her legs off the bike and running forward with arms outstretched. The man moved like a striking panther, crossing the lawn in long strides to scoop Maddie into a fierce embrace. "Maddie! Thank God, baby girl!" he cried, his voice cracking with relief. The woman sobbed into Maddie's hair, while suited men with earpieces hurried across the grass, their faces masks of urgency and concern. Aaliyah stayed frozen at the gate, hands raised instinctively as a younger man approached, signaling her to stop. "I didn't do anything," she blurted, voice cracking with a mix of fear and confusion. But Maddie's voice rang clear, cutting through the murmurs. "He saved me. Don't hurt him. He's my friend." The crowd paused, the atmosphere shifting in an instant. Eyes that had narrowed with suspicion softened, and the tension broke like a wave retreating from the shore. Aaliyah felt herself being pulled forward, not by hands, but by the force of a truth that could not be denied. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just a shadow in the alleys. The man in sunglasses, tall and composed, stepped forward. "What's your name, son?" he asked gently. Aaliyah hesitated, then whispered, "Aaliyah." He nodded. "Aaliyah, we want to thank you for what you did." Charles Whitaker, Maddie's father, offered his hand. "I'm Henry Whitaker. That's my daughter, and you brought her home." Their hands met. A meeting of worlds, of stories, of possibilities. Aaliyah's calloused palm pressed against the smooth, manicured one, and for a moment, neither moved. Then Henry spoke again, voice thick with emotion. "Come inside. You look like you've been through a war. Aaliyah shook her head, her knees weak. I'm okay, she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her exhaustion. Ruth Whitaker, Maddie's mother, stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Aaliyah's shoulder. Please, let us thank you properly. The double doors opened wide, warm light spilling out like a promise. For the first time in a long time, Aaliyah stepped into a world that smelled of cinnamon and fresh laundry, of family and safety. The room was filled with photographs, birthdays, beach trips, laughter frozen in time. Aaliyah felt like an intruder and a guest all at once. Maddie, wrapped in a soft blanket, beckoned her to sit beside her. Aaliyah moved slowly, the weight of belonging settling on her like a fragile new skin. For hours they spoke in pieces, gentle questions, quiet answers. A nurse checked Maddie and insisted on examining Aaliyah's scratches. She ate real food for the first time in days, warm sandwiches and sweet tea that soothed her raw throat. When evening fell, Henry and Ruth sat with Aaliyah, their faces calm but serious. We don't know everything you've been through, Henry said, and we can't pretend to understand. But what you did for our daughter, we can never repay. He paused, exchanging a glance with his wife. But maybe we can offer you something else. A family. Aaliyah's heart pounded, the enormity of the moment crashing over her like a tidal wave. Years of wandering, of silence and shadows, seemed to unravel in a single breath. Henry reached out again. If you want, we want you to be part of this family. Officially. Maddie looked at her, eyes shining with hope. Please say yes. Tears welled in Aaliyah's eyes. You really want me? She whispered. More than anything, Henry said, voice steady and sure. That night, Aaliyah slept in a bed, soft sheets scented with lavender, a room small but filled with warmth and light. A photo of her and Maddie smiled from the bedside table, and on the door, a piece of paper taped carefully read, Aaliyah Whitaker, in bold letters, a name, a home, a new beginning. The first rays of morning light filtered gently through the tall windows of the Whitaker estate, casting a warm glow across the richly furnished room, where Aaliyah had spent her first night as a member of a family she had only ever dreamed of belonging to. The scent of fresh linen mingled with faint traces of lavender, wrapping around her like a fragile promise, a stark contrast to the harsh odors of the streets that had once been her only reality. She awoke slowly, eyes blinking away the haze of sleep, and for a fleeting moment, the grandeur of the room seemed almost unreal. The heavy velvet curtains, the intricate wood carvings, the delicate porcelain vase perched on an antique table, all spoke of a world so far removed from the cracked sidewalks and rusty alleys she had known. Yet, beneath the softness and beauty, a quiet unease stirred within her. As she sat on the edge of the bed, the embroidered letters on the door caught her gaze. Aaliyah Whitaker. The bold black ink seemed to proclaim a new identity, a new life, but also whispered the weight of expectations and unknown challenges. Her fingers traced the letters slowly, the fabric of her new clothes feeling foreign and delicate against her skin. She felt simultaneously vulnerable and strong, like a seedling pushing through hardened soil, uncertain of the world, but determined to grow. Outside the room, the house was stirring. Soft footsteps echoed down polished marble floors, mingling with the distant hum of conversation and the gentle laughter of children awakening to a new day. The Whitaker estate was alive with the rhythms of a family morning, and Aaliyah felt herself pulled into its orbit, both a welcomed guest and a stranger still finding her place. Maddie appeared at the door, radiant and smiling, her blue eyes bright with the innocence and joy of childhood untouched by hardship. Come on, she said, her voice light and eager. I want to show you around. The two girls walked side by side through the vast halls, their footsteps muffled by the thick rugs that cushioned the floor. Aaliyah's eyes drank in the surroundings, walls adorned with family portraits capturing smiles frozen in time, shelves lined with books whose titles promised adventures and knowledge beyond anything she had ever touched. A grand piano standing silent but majestic in the corner, waiting for melodies that had yet to be played. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and blooming gardenias from the sprawling estate gardens, and for a moment, Aaliyah felt as though she had stepped into a storybook. Yet, as she took in the beauty and warmth, a small voice whispered from deep within. Could she truly belong here? Could someone like her, with her past marked by loss and struggle, find a genuine place in this rarefied world? The questions lingered unspoken, shadows lurking beneath the surface of her tentative smile. Later that day, Henry Whitaker, Maddie's father, invited Aaliyah to sit with him in the library, a room filled with the scent of old leather and dust, where sunlight poured through stained glass windows in kaleidoscopic patterns. His gaze was steady, kind, yet tinged with the seriousness of a man who understood the gravity of the moment. "Aaliyah," he began, his voice calm but imbued with deep sincerity, "this is not just about giving you a home or providing for your needs. It is about trust that you can be yourself here, and that we will stand by you as you grow into the person you are meant to be." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the quiet room. "Trust takes time to build, but know that you are not alone. This family will be your anchor, your refuge." Aaliyah nodded slowly, her heart pounding as she absorbed the meaning behind the promise. She had lived much of her life in shadows, learning that trust was fragile, often broken by the harsh realities of the world. Yet, here in this moment, she felt a flicker of hope, an ember that had survived the darkest nights. Days slipped by, each a delicate dance between old fears and new possibilities. Aaliyah found comfort in Maddie's unwavering friendship, the laughter and shared secrets creating a bridge between two worlds. Together, they explored the nuances of life within the Whitaker estate, learning the unspoken rules and gentle rhythms that governed this place of privilege and history. At school, Aaliyah faced fresh challenges. The hallways, once alien and intimidating, slowly became familiar. Some peers greeted her with curiosity, others with whispered doubts and sideways glances that stung sharper than any words. She met these with quiet resilience, drawing strength from her past and the support of those who believed in her. Her teachers saw her potential, encouraging her to dream bigger than the narrow confines she had once known. She joined clubs and activities, tentatively stepping into roles that allowed her to shine beyond survival: debate team, art class, community service, each a thread weaving into the tapestry of her new identity. Yet, the echoes of her past never fully faded. Memories of the fire that had stolen her family haunted her dreams, moments of grief surfacing unexpectedly during quiet afternoons or in the stillness of the night. She carried those scars, both visible and hidden, with a fierce determination not to be defined by them, but to honor their presence as part of her story. The city of New Orleans, with its vibrant music, rich culture, and complex history, became both a backdrop and a character in her unfolding life. She wandered the streets during rare moments of solitude, absorbing the sounds of jazz spilling from open windows, the scent of Cajun spices wafting from bustling markets, and the rhythm of a city that had endured storms and yet danced on. One afternoon, the school held an assembly, and to her surprise, Aaliyah was invited to speak. Standing before a sea of faces, some skeptical, others open, she shared fragments of her journey, the loss, the fear, the kindness that had changed her fate. Her voice trembled at times, but carried the unwavering truth of experience. The auditorium was silent, each listener drawn into the vulnerability and strength woven through her words. When she finished, the applause was slow, tentative at first, then swelling into a powerful wave of support that lifted her spirit beyond anything she had imagined. Yet, as the clapping echoed in her ears, Aaliyah knew that her path was far from complete. The world beyond these walls still bore the weight of prejudice, of inequity, and she would face those battles with courage, grace, and the unyielding love of the family who had chosen her. In the quiet of the Whitaker home, surrounded by portraits of generations past and the soft murmur of evening prayers, Aaliyah lay awake, tracing the intricate patterns on her quilt. She whispered a promise to herself, that she would be a bridge between worlds, breaking down walls of fear and misunderstanding. She would create a life where kindness and strength walked hand in hand, where every child could find a place to belong. Because she was no longer just a girl who had survived the streets. She was a beacon, a living testament to hope, resilience, and the transformative power of love. The days grew longer as New Orleans embraced the warmth of early summer, the humid air thick with the scent of magnolia and freshly brewed coffee drifting through the ornate windows of the Whitaker estate. Yet despite the golden light that poured into the grand halls and the laughter that echoed softly through the rooms, Aaliyah felt an unfamiliar weight settling in her chest, a quiet struggle between the past she could not leave behind and the future she was being urged to embrace. Every morning she woke to a world that was both exhilarating and daunting. The soft sheets of her new bed, the sunlight casting gentle patterns on the polished floors, the subtle kindnesses of her new family. It was a life she had never imagined, and yet it felt almost fragile, as if at any moment it might slip through her fingers like the dust she had once kicked up on the streets. School was a battleground. The polished corridors of the private academy were filled with whispers and sideways glances. Some of the students regarded her with curiosity, others with suspicion or thinly veiled disdain. It was clear she was different, her skin darker, her accent unfamiliar, the stories she carried etched into her eyes. Yet Aaliyah met each challenge with the quiet strength born from years of survival. She remembered the nights spent beneath the overpass, the cold that had seeped into her bones, the hunger that gnawed relentlessly, and she refused to be diminished by those memories. Her teachers noticed. Some offered encouragement in quiet words, recognizing in her a fierce intelligence and determination that defied the limits others tried to impose. She excelled in her studies, her sharp mind absorbing knowledge with a hunger equal to that which had once driven her to scavenge for food. She joined clubs, debate, literature, community service, each new experience a tentative step toward belonging, a chance to build a life beyond mere survival. At home, Ruth Whitaker's gentle guidance helped Aaliyah navigate the intricacies of upper-class society, the unspoken codes, the delicate etiquette, the subtle expectations, dinner parties filled with polite conversation, art galleries that whispered of culture and refinement, charitable events that demanded poise and grace, all new worlds to learn and master. Ruth's kindness was unwavering, her faith in Aaliyah a steady flame in the face of self-doubt. Yet beneath the surface of this new life, the shadows of her past lingered. Memories of the fire that had torn her family apart haunted her dreams. The smell of smoke and burning wood, the screams muffled by smoke, the helplessness of a child caught in a nightmare. The pain was a constant companion, a scar etched not just on her skin, but deep within her soul. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, she traced the lines of the faded blue bracelet her mother had made, its threads worn thin but unbroken, and she whispered silent prayers for the family she had lost, and the future she dared to hope for. One afternoon, the school organized an assembly to celebrate diversity and resilience. Aaliyah was asked to speak, an honor that stirred a mix of fear and pride within her. Standing before the sea of faces, some welcoming, others skeptical, she felt the weight of expectations settle on her shoulders. She spoke of her journey, of the darkness she had known, and the unexpected kindness that had illuminated her path. Her voice trembled at times, but her words carried the unwavering truth of experience. She spoke not just of hardship, but of hope, the power of compassion, the strength found in connection, the possibility of transformation. When she finished, the silence in the auditorium was profound, as if every listener had been touched by the raw honesty of her story. Then, applause erupted, not loud at first, but growing steadily, a wave of acceptance and support that lifted her spirit beyond anything she had imagined possible. Yet even as the applause echoed, Aaliyah knew the road ahead was long. The world beyond these walls still bore the scars of prejudice and inequality, and she would have to face those battles with courage and grace. In the quiet sanctuary of the Whitaker home, surrounded by portraits of generations past and the soft murmur of evening prayers, Aaliyah lay awake, tracing the intricate patterns on her quilt. She whispered a promise to herself, that she would be a bridge between worlds, breaking down walls of fear and misunderstanding, creating a life where kindness and strength walked hand in hand. Because she was no longer just a girl who had survived the streets, she was a beacon, a living testament to hope, resilience, and the transformative power of love. The heavy weight of expectation pressing down on her chest like a suffocating blanket. The bright sunlight filtering through the tall windows of the Whitaker estate, casting long, distorted shadows across the polished hardwood floor. The house that once seemed a sanctuary now felt like an arena where every word she spoke, every movement she made, was under scrutiny from unseen eyes. She dressed slowly, the new clothes feeling foreign and fragile against her skin, as if at any moment they might unravel and expose the girl underneath. The girl who had known hunger, fear, and the cold concrete beneath her back. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Maddie chatted eagerly about school and friends, oblivious to the storm of feelings swirling inside Aaliyah. Across the table, Henry and Ruth Whitaker exchanged glances, their smiles warm but tinged with concern, as if they too felt the fragile thread upon which this new chapter balanced. After the meal, Aaliyah was introduced to the world she would now inhabit, the private school where Maddie studied, the sprawling library filled with books she had never dreamed of touching, the extracurricular activities that seemed to promise a future far beyond what she had imagined. The day's lessons brought new challenges. Teachers spoke in polished tones that carried an undercurrent of expectation. Some peers whispered behind cupped hands, casting curious glances her way. She felt the weight of their judgment, the subtle but relentless pressure to prove she belonged. Yet within this pressure, Aaliyah found sparks of something new. Moments of connection, laughter shared with Maddie during lunch, the gentle encouragement of a teacher who saw beyond her exterior to the fierce intelligence and kindness beneath. At home, Ruth Whitaker invited Aaliyah to join in conversations about the family's philanthropic endeavors, subtly encouraging her to see herself not just as a beneficiary, but as a participant, someone with a voice and purpose. But the city beyond the Whitaker gates whispered reminders of where she came from. During a rare afternoon stroll through a nearby park, Aaliyah felt the eyes of strangers follow her, their silent questions and assumptions like invisible chains. She thought of the lower Ninth Ward, the cracked sidewalks, the peeling paint, the alleys where she had once been queen of her small world. She missed the freedom of those streets, the rough edges that had shaped her, even as she welcomed the safety and promise of her new life. One evening, as twilight bled into night, Henry took Aaliyah aside in the grand library, his voice low and serious. "Aaliyah, this isn't just about giving you a home. It's about trust. Trust that you can be yourself here, and trust that we will protect you. But trust takes time." Aaliyah nodded, the weight of his words settling in her bones. She had learned long ago that trust was fragile, something earned and guarded fiercely. Yet she felt a flicker of hope, a tentative thread reaching out from her heart toward this new family who had opened their doors to her. Days turned into weeks, each filled with small victories and quiet struggles. Aaliyah found solace in the company of Maddie, whose unwavering friendship became a lifeline amid the swirling currents of change. Together, they navigated the delicate dance between two worlds, the polished elegance of Garden District and the raw resilience of Lower Ninth Ward. As Aaliyah grew stronger, her past began to surface in unexpected ways. Memories of the fire that had taken her family haunted her dreams, the scars both visible and unseen shaping her every step. Yet she refused to be defined by those shadows. Instead, she channeled her pain into purpose, determined to forge a future that honored both where she had come from and where she was going. At school, she excelled quietly, her sharp mind and keen intuition earning the respect of teachers and peers alike. She joined clubs and activities, tentatively exploring talents and passions she had never imagined pursuing. With each new accomplishment, the walls around her heart cracked a little wider, allowing light to seep in. One afternoon, during a school assembly, Aaliyah was invited to speak about her journey, a moment that felt both terrifying and liberating. Standing before the crowd, her voice steady but soft, she shared pieces of her story, the loss, the fear, the unexpected kindness that had changed everything. The auditorium was silent, the weight of her words sinking deep into every listener's heart. When she finished, the applause was slow at first, then swelling into a roar of support that lifted her spirits higher than she had ever imagined. But even as the applause echoed in her ears, Aaliyah knew that her journey was far from over. The world beyond those walls still carried prejudice and pain, and she would have to face them with courage and grace. At home, the Whitakers stood by her side, their love unwavering, their faith in her a shield against the storms to come. One night, as she lay in her bed, the moonlight casting silver patterns on the ceiling, Aaliyah whispered a promise to herself. She would build bridges between worlds, break down walls of fear, and create a life where kindness and strength walked hand in hand. Because she was no longer just a girl from the streets, she was a beacon, a living testament to the power of hope, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unbreakable bonds of chosen family. The symphony, the distant hum of jazz spilling from open windows, the rhythmic clatter of streetcars on their iron tracks, and the soft murmur of voices rising from corner cafes. Yet for Aaliyah, each step outside the gates of the Whitaker estate was a step into unfamiliar territory, a world of contrasts that both fascinated and intimidated her. The Garden District, with its stately oak trees draped in Spanish moss and grand mansions painted in pastel hues, was a far cry from the crumbling streets of Lower Ninth Ward where she had once roamed. As she walked alongside Maddie, the two girls became an unlikely pair, one born into privilege, the other reclaimed by it through an act of courage and compassion. School presented challenges that tested Aaliyah's resolve daily. The polished hallways echoed with laughter and whispered judgments, some peers curious about the girl who had come from nowhere, others wary of the difference she embodied. Rumors flitted like shadows, yet Aaliyah met them with quiet strength, refusing to be defined by the assumptions of others. She discovered allies in unexpected places, a teacher who saw her potential beyond her circumstances, classmates who admired her resilience and kindness. Slowly, she began to weave herself into the tapestry of the community, her voice finding strength through advocacy and participation in clubs and school events. But the true battle was internal. The memories of her past, the fire that had claimed her family, the nights spent in cold alleys, the sting of rejection and loneliness haunted her dreams. At times, the weight of those memories threatened to overwhelm the fragile hope she carried. Yet each morning, she would touch the faded blue bracelet her mother had made, a tangible reminder of love and endurance. Home life brought its own trials. The Whitakers, though loving and supportive, could not erase the invisible barriers of class and culture overnight. Dinner conversations sometimes left Aaliyah feeling out of place, a spectator to worlds of wealth and opportunity that had once seemed unreachable. Yet Henry and Ruth Whitaker's patience and understanding were unwavering, their belief in her a shield against the doubts that crept in. One evening, during a family gathering, Aaliyah faced a moment of reckoning. A distant relative, unaware of her story, made a careless remark about outsiders and where some people come from. The words cut deep, and silence fell heavy in the room. Aaliyah felt every eye turn toward her, some with curiosity, others with judgment. Summoning every ounce of courage, she stood and spoke, not just for herself, but for every child who had been written off, for every soul seeking a place to belong. Her voice was steady, tinged with the quiet fire that had carried her through darkness. She shared her journey, the loss, the hope, the power of kindness, and called for understanding and compassion beyond class and color. The room was still, the impact of her words settling like a warm embrace. Slowly, apologies were offered, and a new respect was born in that moment. It was a breakthrough, a reminder that bridges could be built, even over deep divides. Outside school, Aaliyah continued to explore the city that was now her home. She volunteered at community centers in the Lower Ninth Ward, bridging her two worlds by bringing resources and hope to neighborhoods like the one she had once called home. Through these acts, she found purpose, a way to honor her past while shaping her future. In quiet moments, she would walk along the Mississippi River, the water's steady flow, a metaphor for life's constant changes. She reflected on how far she had come, from a frightened girl hiding in alleys to a young woman with a family, a voice, and a mission. Her bond with Maddie deepened into a sisterhood, forged in trust and shared experience, a testament to the power of friendship to transcend differences. As the seasons turned, Aaliyah understood that her story was still unfolding, a tapestry woven with threads of struggle and triumph, loss and love. She embraced the challenges ahead, knowing that with every step, she was forging a path not just for herself, but for those who would come after her, proof that no matter the shadows cast by the past, the light of hope could always shine through. The heavy veil of night was beginning to lift as the first delicate brushstrokes of dawn tinted the sky over New Orleans, casting a soft amber glow across the sprawling neighborhoods that divided wealth and want, privilege and struggle. Aaliyah felt the subtle shift in the air as she steadied her breath, preparing for what she knew was the most crucial leg of their journey, one that would carry Maddie, the fragile girl perched behind her, back to the safety and sanctuary of a home that for so long had been nothing more than a whispered memory. The battered bike beneath her creaked with every push of her legs, the metal groaning as if reluctant to bear the weight of not only the child, but the enormous responsibility pressing down on Aaliyah's young shoulders. Maddie clung tightly to the worn sweatshirt draped over her, an oversized shield against a world that still seemed uncertain and strange. The city around them awoke in slow pulses, the distant laughter of children starting their day, the faint murmur of conversations in open doorways, the intermittent clang of streetcars rumbling along their ancient rails. Yet beneath this ordinary symphony lay an undercurrent of danger, a quiet threat that sharpened Aaliyah's senses with every moment they moved closer to the gated divide. Navigating the labyrinth of side streets and dimly lit alleys, Aaliyah's gaze flicked constantly to the shadows, her heart pounding not just from exertion, but from the knowledge that the men who had hunted Maddie might still be lurking, waiting for any misstep. The city was an endless tapestry of contradictions, its beauty and vibrancy woven tightly with threads of hardship and fear. Here, in the forgotten pockets where Aaliyah had once roamed freely, she was a survivor. Now, in these polished enclaves, she was an intruder balancing on the knife's edge of acceptance and suspicion. Each turn brought new risks, the wary eyes of early commuters, the suspicion of shopkeepers opening their doors, the silence that fell abruptly when passersby noticed the incongruity of the pair. A dark-skinned girl with calloused hands, and a pale child swathed in oversized clothing. Their fragile disguise was all that stood between safety and discovery, a delicate dance of shadows and silence. At one point, they paused behind the weathered facade of a boarded-up store, the shattered glass glinting faintly in the morning light. Maddie sipped cautiously from a water bottle Aaliyah had carried with her, the tremor in her hands easing as hydration soothed her weary body. It was in this quiet moment that Maddie broke the silence, her voice small, yet filled with genuine curiosity. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her blue eyes searching Aaliyah's face. Aaliyah's breath hitched as she looked down at her friend, the weight of that question settling deeply within her. With quiet conviction, she replied, "Because someone has to. Because I know what it's like to be alone and scared. I don't want you to feel that way." Maddie nodded, leaning her head gently against Aaliyah's back, a gesture that spoke volumes of trust and the burgeoning bond between them. "You're the best person I've ever met," Maddie whispered, and those words wrapped around Aaliyah's heart like a balm. The city around them stirred to life with increasing energy, the streets growing busier as the day progressed. The neighborhoods began to shift, too. The cracked sidewalks and graffiti-streaked walls gave way to cleaner streets lined with towering oak trees draped in Spanish moss, to pristine lawns and stately homes with pastel facades. Aaliyah's chest tightened as the white iron gates of Maddie's home came into view, a threshold both literal and symbolic marking the divide between the world she knew and the one Maddie called home. The grand driveway wound gently uphill, flanked by perfectly trimmed hedges and shaded by ancient trees whose branches whispered secrets in the morning breeze. The air itself seemed different here, cleaner, quieter, and charged with an expectation that pressed on Aaliyah's senses like a palpable force. Her grip on the bike tightened, the tires crunching softly on the cobblestone as she approached the open gates. From the porch, a tall man with graying hair stood rigid, his gaze locked on the approaching figures. Beside him, a woman clutched a phone, her hands trembling as she paced anxiously. Aaliyah's heart pounded in her chest, every muscle tense as she brought the bike to a halt. Maddie's small voice broke the silence. "That's my house." Aaliyah nodded silently, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. Maddie slid off the bike and ran toward her father, her arms outstretched. Henry Whitaker caught her mid-run, his voice cracking with relief and raw emotion. "Maddie, thank God, baby girl." The crowd on the lawn seemed to erupt in a flurry of movement. Suit-clad men hurried forward, the woman on the phone sobbed into Maddie's hair, and a hush fell over the gathering as all eyes turned toward Aaliyah. Frozen at the edge of the driveway, hands raised instinctively in defense, Aaliyah heard Maddie's voice ring out clear and unwavering. "He saved me! Don't hurt him! He's my friend!" The power of those words shifted the atmosphere instantly. Where suspicion had been thick, now there was a fragile respect. Henry stepped forward, extending a hand toward Aaliyah. "Thank you," he said simply. "You have done something extraordinary." Aaliyah hesitated before placing her calloused hand in his, the contact a bridge between two vastly different worlds. The warmth of acceptance washed over her in waves, carrying away years of loneliness, fear, and invisibility. The grand doors to the estate swung open, and for the first time, Aaliyah stepped into a world of light and belonging. The scent of cinnamon and fresh linen filled the air, mingling with the soft murmur of family voices and the distant strains of a piano. Portraits of smiling faces lined the walls, birthdays, vacations, moments frozen in time, reminders of a life that once seemed unreachable. Maddie, wrapped now in a soft blanket, beckoned Aaliyah to sit beside her on a plush sofa. Every moment was filled with gentle questions and quiet answers, an unfolding of stories and lives converging in this unexpected family. A nurse arrived to check on Maddie's health and insisted on tending to Aaliyah as well, noting the scratches and wear on her arms and legs. For the first time in days, Aaliyah tasted the comfort of hot tea with honey and the richness of a sandwich layered with fresh ingredients, a stark contrast to the meager scraps she had known. That evening, Henry and Ruth Whitaker sat with Aaliyah, their voices calm but heavy with meaning. "We cannot repay you with money or gifts," Henry said, "but we can offer you a place in this family if you will have it. Aaliyah, you have our trust, and we want to walk this journey with you." Maddie reached out, her hand resting on Aaliyah's. "Please say yes," she urged softly. Tears welled in Aaliyah's eyes as she realized that this moment was the culmination of years of hardship and hope, a turning point where her story shifted from survival to belonging. "You really want me?" she whispered, voice trembling. Henry smiled, steady and sure. More than anything, that night, Aaliyah slept beneath soft sheets scented with lavender, in a room small but radiant with warmth and light. A framed photo of her and Maddie sat on the bedside table, a testament to the bond forged in fear and kindness. On the door hung a simple piece of paper, bold letters proclaiming Aaliyah Whitaker, a name, a home, a future unwritten but filled with promise. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Whitaker estate, painting golden patterns on the polished floors and casting a soft glow over the new life that awaited Aaliyah. She lay awake for a moment, the delicate hum of the household stirring around her, a symphony of whispered conversations, footsteps on velvet rugs, and the faint clink of china from the kitchen below. This was a world so different from the streets and shadows she had known, yet the weight of that difference pressed gently upon her, like a tide pulling her towards something uncertain but inevitable. As she rose and prepared for the day, the unfamiliar softness of her new clothes felt both comforting and strange against her skin. Each piece was a symbol of transformation, a barrier against the memories that clung stubbornly beneath her surface. But Aaliyah knew that true change was not in the fabric she wore, but in the courage to confront the past and step boldly into the future. Breakfast was a quiet affair, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread filling the air. Maddie chatted animatedly about school and upcoming events, her laughter a bright thread weaving through the morning calm. Across the table, Henry and Ruth Whitaker exchanged looks of pride and concern, their eyes reflecting the complex emotions of a family learning to grow anew. The school day brought its own trials and triumphs. Aaliyah navigated hallways filled with unfamiliar faces and whispered judgments, some curious, others wary. She met each challenge with quiet resilience, drawing strength from the support of her teachers and the friendship of Maddie. Slowly, she began to carve a space for herself, a place where her voice could be heard and her spirit recognized. Yet the shadows of her past lingered like ghosts at the edges of her thoughts. Memories of fire and loss haunted her dreams, moments of fear and solitude flashing in the quiet darkness. But with each passing day, those shadows grew less oppressive, pushed back by the light of belonging and the steadfast love of her new family. In the evenings, Ruth Whitaker guided Aaliyah through the unspoken customs of their world, conversations about art and music, lessons in grace and poise, the delicate balance of tradition and change. These moments, filled with gentle patience and understanding, became the thread stitching together a tapestry of hope and renewal. One night, during a family gathering, Aaliyah faced a test of strength. A distant relative, unaware of her journey, made a careless remark about outsiders and where some people come from. The words cut sharply, and the room fell into an uneasy silence. Eyes turned toward Aaliyah, some filled with curiosity, others with thinly veiled skepticism. Summoning every ounce of courage, she stood and spoke, not only for herself, but for all who had been overlooked and underestimated. Her voice was steady, carrying the quiet fire that had sustained her through darkness and despair. She shared her story, the pain and the hope, the kindness that had changed her life, and called for compassion beyond boundaries of race and class. The room listened, the weight of her words sinking deep. Apologies followed, bridges were built, and a new respect took root in that moment, a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of the human spirit. Beyond the walls of the Whitaker home, Aaliyah found ways to give back, bridging the divide between her two worlds. She volunteered at community centers in the lower Ninth Ward, bringing hope and resources to neighborhoods that mirrored her own past. Through service, she found purpose, honoring where she had come from while forging a path forward. In moments of quiet reflection by the Mississippi River, Aaliyah felt the flow of life around her, a constant, unending current that carried both sorrow and joy. She knew her story was still being written, a tapestry woven with struggle and triumph, loss and love. With Maddie by her side, their bond a testament to friendship's power to transcend difference, Aaliyah embraced her future, one filled with challenges, growth, and the unbreakable promise of hope. The quiet morning light spilled gently through the tall windows of the Whitaker estate, illuminating the room where Aaliyah now lay, a room she had never imagined she would have. The walls, painted a soft cream, held framed pictures of smiling faces. Shelves lined with books whispered of stories waiting to be told and dreams yet to be realized. The scent of lavender from the fresh linens filled the air, wrapping her in a comforting embrace. For a long moment, she simply breathed, letting the warmth and the stillness seep into every part of her being. She rose slowly, her bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. Each step she took echoed softly in the quiet house, a reminder that this place was now hers as much as anyone else's. On the door hung a simple piece of paper, boldly inscribed in black marker, Aaliyah Whitaker, a name, a declaration, a promise. Aaliyah traced the letters with trembling fingers, feeling the weight and the hope behind them. This was more than a label. It was the bridge between the life she had lived and the life she was now beginning to build. Downstairs, the sounds of morning filled the house, the clinking of dishes, the murmur of voices, the laughter of Maddie. Aaliyah dressed with care, the soft fabric of her clothes a stark contrast to the threadbare garments she once wore. At breakfast, the Whitaker family welcomed her with smiles and warmth, their acceptance a balm to wounds she hadn't known were so deep. As the days turned into weeks, Aaliyah embraced her new life with courage and determination. She enrolled in school, where new teachers and classmates greeted her with curiosity and, sometimes, skepticism. Yet she met every challenge with the quiet strength that had carried her through darker days. She excelled in her studies, joined clubs, and found joy in small victories, a kind word, a shared laugh, a new friendship. Maddie was her constant companion and fiercest ally, their bond a testament to the power of kindness and trust. Together, they explored the city, the riverfront, the vibrant streets of New Orleans, weaving memories that would sustain them through whatever lay ahead. Yet, Aaliyah never forgot the journey that had brought her here, the nights spent in alleys, the cold nights beneath the overpass, the fear and uncertainty that once defined her world. She carried those memories not as burdens, but as fuel for her dreams. She volunteered in community centers, offering hope to those still trapped in the shadows she had escaped. One afternoon, as she walked along the river's edge, the sun casting golden reflections on the water, Aaliyah felt a profound sense of peace. The city around her was alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. She was no longer the girl who had been invisible, no longer the child afraid of the night. She was Aaliyah Whitaker, named, loved, and belonging. Her story was still unfolding, a tapestry woven with threads of struggle and triumph, loss and love. And with each new dawn, she embraced the promise of a future shaped by resilience, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of courage and hope. Aaliyah's story reminds us all that even in the darkest moments, a single act of kindness can change lives forever. If this story moved you, please like, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below telling us what part touched you the most. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to join our community and hear more inspiring stories just like this one. Together, we can spread hope and make the world a better place, one story at a time.